Hey guys, tonight we drift northward, into a world where the air feels sharper in your lungs and the light itself seems to rationed carefully by the sky. You're standing on the edge of a flat boots, crunching lightly against frost-stiffened ground, watching the last ship of the season pull away. Its sail shrinks into the gray distance, and with it goes the final, easy connection to the wider world. You probably won't survive this winter not because it's dramatic or violent, but because it demands a level of patience that modern life has gently trained out of you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Winter closes the fjord gates almost politely. There is no grand announcement, no single moment when someone bangs a shield and declares the season begun. Instead, you notice small things. The water grows thicker, darker. The gulls linger longer on shore, as if double-checking their own travel plans. Farmers like you take these signs seriously. Mainstream history often reminds us that Vikings were skilled sailors and raiders, but historians still argue whether their greatest talent was actually long-term planning. Because once winter settles in, planning is all you have left. You walk back toward the longhouse, its low shape crouched against the wind like an animal conserving warmth. The roof is heavy with turf, insulating layers of earth, doing quiet work day and night. Smoke leaks from a hole at the top, slow and steady, carrying the smell of burning wood and old meals. This isn't discomfort, it's familiarity. Archaeological evidence shows that most Viking farmers lived in these longhouses year-round, sharing space not just with family, but sometimes with livestock as well. It sounds unpleasant by modern standards, but you quickly learn that any body heat is a valuable resource. Inside, the world contracts, the vastness of the sea, the drama of cliffs and sky, all shrink down to a rectangle of firelight. The hearth sits in the center, not against a wall, because warmth needs to travel evenly. You sit, you stand, you squat. Posture is flexible when chairs are rare. A quirky detail historians love to mention is that smoke inhalation was so common that mildly irritated eyes were probably just considered the default facial expression. No one complains. Complaining wastes breath, and breath fogs the air. The fjord itself begins to change personality. It no longer invites movement, it discourages it. Ice creeps along the edges, fragile at first, then confident. Boats are pulled up and turned over, not ceremonially, just practically. Wood cracks if you don't treat it right. Ropes stiffen. The sea, once a highway, becomes a boundary. You're not trapped exactly, you're simply staying put. There's a difference. And Viking farmers understood it deeply. Food thoughts start to dominate your mental landscape. Not in a panicked way, just in a constant, background hum. You already did the hard work months ago. Hay cut and stacked. Fish dried on wooden racks. Meat salted or smoked. One mainstream fact is that dried cod, stockfish, became a cornerstone of winter survival. A more obscure tidbit is that some families fermented meat or fish just enough to keep it edible, trusting taste buds honed by necessity. Historians still argue whether these foods were considered delicacies or merely tolerated. Either way, you chew slowly, grateful for calories more than flavor. Outside, daylight shortens in a way that feels almost personal. The sun's appearances become brief. You adapt without ceremony. Work shifts inward. Instead of fields, you tend tools. Instead of crops, you tend relationships. Winter is when arguments either cool off or quietly harden. There's nowhere to storm off to. The longhouse remembers everything said within its walls, echoing it back at odd moments. Usually when you're trying to sleep, sleep itself becomes a flexible concept. You nap, you wake, you stare at the ceiling beams, counting not sheep but the small sounds of the house settling. Wood pops, animals shift, someone coughs. There's a low-grade humor in it. I'll imagine thinking Vikings were constantly shouting and fighting, when in reality most of winter is spent trying not to step on a goat in the dark. If there's a joke here, it's a quiet one, shared in glances rather than laughter. Religion seeps into the season gently. You don't suddenly become more devout, but you do become more aware of forces beyond your control. A small offering here, a murmured thanks there. Scholars debate how much daily life was truly guided by belief versus habit, but in winter, the line blurs. When survival depends on weather, and weather answers to no one, politeness toward the gods feels reasonable. As the fjord finally seals itself with ice, there's a sense of completion. Not victory, not defeat, just closure. You've done what you can. Now comes the waiting. The remarkable thing, and perhaps the most boring, in the best possible way, is how calmly it all unfolds. No epic speeches, no dramatic countdowns. Just people, fire, food, and time moving at its own unhurried pace. And as you settle into that rhythm, breathing slowly, letting the cold stay outside, where it belongs, you realize this is how Viking farmers survived long winters without complaining. Not through toughness alone, but through acceptance. Through routines so steady they almost rock you to sleep. The longhouse greets you again, not as a shelter this time, but as a world in miniature. You step inside and the door closes with a dull, familiar thud, sealing out the wind and sealing you into a shared rhythm of warmth, smoke, and human presence. Outside, winter feels vast and impersonal. Inside, everything is close enough to hear breathing. The air is thick, but reassuringly so, like a blanket you don't entirely love but refuse to give up. Longhouses are built low on purpose. Mainstream archaeology tells us their sunken floors helped trap warmth, while thick walls of timber, stone, and packed earth resisted the worst of the cold. You notice how little space is wasted. Benches line the walls, serving as seats by day and beds by night. There's no dramatic transition between Acadiza life, simply slides from one posture to another. Historians still argue whether privacy, as we understand it, even existed here. You suspect it didn't, and somehow, that makes things simpler. Smoke curls lazily upward from the central hearth, never quite escaping fast enough. There's no chimney in the modern sense, just an opening in the roof that negotiates with the wind. Some days it works better than others. A quirky but well-documented fact is that Viking longhouses often had surprisingly good ventilation for their time. Though good is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Your eyes sting slightly. No one mentions it. This is just how eyes feel in winter. Animals shift at the far end of the house. Not all of them only the most valuable or the most fragile. Cows, sheep, maybe a goat with a habit of chewing anything remotely rope-shaped. Bringing animals indoors sounds chaotic, but it's carefully managed. Their body heat matters, and so does their survival. A living cow in spring is milk, calves, and status. Historians still debate how common full cohabitation was, but winter evidence suggests it happened often enough to be unremarkable. You step carefully. Complaining about manure placement won't move it. Time stretches differently here. Without fields to tend or boats to sail, your days are measured in small tasks. Someone feeds the fire. Someone checks the hay. Someone else repairs a leather strap that's been broken since autumn but finally has its moment. This is the season of maintenance. Tools get the kind of attention they never receive in summer. You smooth a wooden handle, slowly, not because it needs perfection, but because your hands need something to do. Food preparation becomes rich. Meals are simple, repetitive, and deeply familiar. Porridge thickened with whatever grain survived storage. Dried meat softened just enough by boiling. Sour milk products that modern taste buds might reject, but yours accept without debate. A fringe historical tidbit suggests that some fermented dairy products were intentionally smelling, perhaps as a sign they were still active and safe. Historians still argue whether taste preferences adapted or whether hunger simply lowered standards. Either way, you eat steadily. Light enters the longhouse reluctantly. When it does, it slides along the walls, catching on hanging tools and the edges of shields long retired from excitement. Most of your illumination comes from the fire and from small oil lamps. They don't banish darkness, they negotiate with it. Shadows remain, stretched and soft. It's easy to imagine shapes that aren't there, and easier still to ignore them. Fear takes energy. Winter budgets are tight. Conversation ebbs and flows. Stories are told slowly, not for performance, but for companionship. You've heard some of them before. That doesn't matter. Repetition is comforting. Sagas aren't recited in full every night. Snippets surfaced when relevant. A boast here, a cautionary tale there. Scholars often emphasize oral tradition, but historians still argue how formal storytelling really was. From where you sit, it feels casual stories drifting in and out like smoke. Sleep comes in segments. You lie down when tired, wake when cold, adjust closer to the fire, then drift off again. There's no rigid schedule. The body decides. A light joke passes through your mind. You'd call this polyphasic sleep today, and write an article about it. Here, it's just winter. No one tracks it. No one optimizes it. You rest when you can. As the night deepens, the longhouse creaks softly. Wood contracts. Wind tests the walls, finds them unresponsive, and moves on. You feel held not gently, exactly, but securely. This space has survived many winters before you, and it doesn't need reassurance. You close your eyes, listening to the low murmur of life continuing around you. This is survival without drama, endurance without applause, just warmth, patience, and the quiet understanding that winter will pass when it's ready. Even though winter feels endless, once it settles in, your mind keeps drifting back to summer. Not nostalgically, more practically. Summer is no longer a season. It's a storage strategy. Every bite you take now is a delayed echo of warm days when the sun stayed up far too late and work never seemed to end. You remember cutting hay under a sky that refused to darken, arms aching in a way that felt productive rather than worrying. That effort is paying rent now. Barrels line the edges of the longhouse, tucked into corners like quiet promises. They're not impressive to look at, rough staves, uneven lids, but they hold your future. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking farmers relied heavily on preservation methods like drying, salting, and smoking to survive winter. What's less often mentioned is how much faith that required. You sealed these containers months ago, trusting your own judgment and the weather to cooperate. There's no check-in expiration dates. You open a barrel only when necessary. And when you do, you hope haylofts matter more now than fields ever did. The sweet, dusty smell of dried grass fills your nose when you climb up to check supplies. Livestock survival depends on it, and so does yours. Indirectly. A cow that eats through winter gives milk in spring. A cow that doesn't, well, you don't dwell on that. Historians still argue about average herd sizes for small Viking farms, but evidence suggests they were modest. That means every animal counts. You run numbers in your head without writing them down, a mental arithmetic shaped by necessity. Fish is the quiet hero of winter. Stockfish cod dried until it's nearly wooden hangs in bundles, or weights stacked neatly, hard as planks. A quirky historical tidbit is that properly dried stockfish can last for years. And sometimes did. You soften it by soaking or boiling, transforming it from construction material into food. The taste is mild, dependable. It doesn't surprise you, and that's the point. Winter meals are not meant to excite, they're meant to repeat. Grain is treated with a near religious seriousness. You measure carefully, knowing exactly how much can be spared. Porridge becomes a daily constant, thickened or thinned, depending on the mood of supplies. Historians still debate how widespread bread baking was in rural Viking households during winter, but boiling grain is efficient, forgiving, and warm. You stir slowly, watching steam rise, feeling like you're feeding time itself. There's a rhythm to checking stores. Not obsessive, just attentive. Too much checking wastes energy and breeds anxiety. Too little invites disaster. You strike a balance, trusting memory and habit. Modern people might call this intuitive inventory management. You call it Tuesday. Occasionally something goes wrong. A barrel leaks, mold appears where it shouldn't. These moments are handled quietly. No shouting, no blame. Winter doesn't care whose fault it is. You scrape away what you can, salvage what remains, adjust portions slightly smaller. Complaining won't add calories. This is one of those unspoken rules everyone seems to know. Food preparation becomes slower, almost ceremonial. You chew longer, not just because the food demands it, but because there's nowhere to rush to. Eating fills time as much as stomachs. A light, sleepy joke drifts through your mind. You've never practiced mindful eating this intensely in your life, and you didn't even have to download an app. As darkness presses against the walls again, you feel a steady reassurance. The barrels are still there. The hay still smells right. The fish is still edible. Summer did its job. Now winter is doing its own. Teaching patience through repetition, you settle back by the fire. Full enough, warm enough, and quietly impressed by how much of survival depends not on heroics, but on careful packing and the ability to wait. The fields lie silent now, buried beneath frost and a thin, stubborn crust of snow. You step outside briefly, more out of habit than necessity, and look over land that once demanded your constant attention. Furrows are softened, almost erased, as if the earth itself is taking a long rest. This is not failure or abandonment. It's a pause, agreed upon by everyone involved, including the soil. Plows stand idle, leaned carefully against sheds or walls. Their wooden frames would crack if left exposed too long. So you've brought them in close, treated them with oil, checked iron fittings for rust. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking agriculture depended heavily on simple but durable tools, designed to last many seasons. Winter is when you make sure they actually do. Historians still argue how often farmers replaced versus repaired equipment. But from your perspective, repair is cheaper than hope. Without planting or harvesting, time opens up in strange ways. Days feel less segmented. There's no sunrise urgency, no sunset panic. Instead, you move according to light and cold. When it's bright enough, you do small indoor tasks. When it's dark, you rest or sit. This isn't laziness. It's energy conservation, practiced long before anyone gave it a scientific name. You notice how silence behaves differently outdoors in winter. Sound travels farther, but feels softer. A distant crack of ice on the fjord echoes faintly. Snow absorbs footsteps, turning movement into suggestion rather than statement. Standing here, you understand why winter farming involves so much waiting. The land isn't unproductive, it's inaccessible. You wouldn't argue with a locked door. You simply come back later. Back inside, conversations drift towards spring without urgency. Someone mentions seed grain, counted and recounted. Someone else wonders aloud whether last year's barley will sprout well. Historians still debate crop yields in North Scandinavia, but you know this much. You plant what you have, not what you wish for. Optimism is measured, realistic, and quietly folded into planning. Idle hands don't stay idle for long. You clean, you organize. You sharpen blades that won't cut anything for months. This sharpening is almost meditative, slow strokes against stone, listening for the right sound. A quirky detail from archaeological finds suggests that some tools show more wear from repeated sharpening than from actual use. Winter leaves its mark in subtle ways. You think, briefly, about how strange this would feel to someone used to constant productivity. Here, usefulness isn't about output, it's about readiness. Fields resting now will work harder later. So will you? There's a deep logic to it, one that doesn't need explanation or complaint. As night settles again, you're not frustrated by the lack of progress. You've done exactly what winter allows. The fields will wait, and so will you, calmly, without fuss, letting patience do its quiet work. Winter rearranges your idea of companionship. In summer, animals are assets at a distance, moving shapes in fields, responsibilities measured in feeding times and fences. Now, they are neighbors. You share air, warmth, and the occasional annoyed glance when someone chews too loudly. The longhouse feels more crowded, but also more alive. Humming softly with breath and movement, cows stand patiently at one end, their sides rising and falling in slow, dependable rhythms. Sheep cluster together, their wool doing much of the insulating work for you by proxy. A goat tests its luck near a stack of tools, pretending innocence. A mainstream historical fact is that keeping animals indoors during winter reduced heat loss and protected valuable livestock. What sounds unpleasant to modern ears was, to you, a sensible arrangement. Historians still argue how widespread full indoor stabling was, but winter survival evidence suggests it was common enough to be normal. There's a system to it. Animals aren't allowed everywhere. Boundaries are clear, reinforced gently but consistently. You learn to move around them without thinking, stepping over a tail here, around a hoof there. At night, their warmth radiates outward, subtly raising the temperature of the space. It's not cozy in a storybook with its functional warmth, the kind you appreciate quietly. The smells become part of the background. Straw, manure, damp, wool, smoke, none of it is shocking. Your senses recalibrate. A quirky historical tidbit is that some archaeological sites show carefully layered flooring. Straw replaced regularly to manage waste and insulation. This isn't neglect, it's maintenance. Winter is full of it. Caring for animals gives structure to the day. They still need feeding, watering, check in for illness. You talk to them, not because you expect answers, but because silence doesn't feel necessary. Historians still debate how emotionally attached Viking farmers were to their livestock, but it's hard not to care for creatures that directly determine whether you eat in spring. Illness is watched closely. A limping sheep or a coughing cow draws attention immediately. You rely on observation more than intervention. Herbs, warmth, rest. A fringe belief holds that certain charms or whispered phrases helped animals recover. Whether that worked or not, the extra attention certainly didn't hurt. Winter teaches you to notice small changes early. There's a mild humor in sharing space this closely. You wake to a cow snorting at something only it can see. A sheep leans against the wall like it owns the place. You think, briefly, about how modern people pay for heated floors, while you're standing on a much more literal version. The joke is quiet, but satisfying. As darkness stretches on, the animals settle, and so do you. Their steady presence is oddly calming. A reminder that survival is collective. You're not enduring winter alone. You're doing it together, breathing the same air, waiting for the same thaw. Darkness becomes less of an event and more of a condition. You stop reacting to it and start planning around it. The days are no longer short so much as abbreviated, like they've been politely edited down to the essentials. When the sun does appear, it skims the horizon without commitment, casting long, sideways light that feels borrowed. You accept it without comment, your routines adjust quietly. You wake when it's still dark, not because you have somewhere to be, but because your body has decided it's done resting for now. Sleep comes in pieces. A few hours here, a doze there. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was common in pre-industrial societies, but winter seems to encourage it naturally. There's no clock demanding 8 uninterrupted hours. There's only warmth, fatigue, and instinct. Light is treated as a resource. Oil lamps are lit deliberately, never casually. Wicks are trimmed with care. You position lamps to stretch illumination as far as possible, letting shadows do some of the work. Firelight flickers across the walls, turning ordinary objects into slow-moving shapes. It's easy to stare into the flames longer than necessary, watching thoughts drift without direction. No one calls this meditation. It's just what happens when there's nothing urgent to interrupt you. You become familiar with the sound of wind at night, not just the fact of it, but its moods. A steady wind is tolerable, almost comforting. A gusty one keeps you alert, listening for changes. Snow against the walls makes a dull, padded sound, like the world being gently wrapped. You find it oddly reassuring. Winter announces itself constantly, but rarely demands a response. Inside the longhouse, time blurs. Without strong light cues, meals drift later or earlier. No one complains. Hunger eventually speaks up, and that's enough. A quirky historical detail suggests that Viking timekeeping relied heavily on natural cycles and observation rather than strict measurement. Winter proves how flexible that can be. You don't lose time, you loosen it. Conversation slows in the dark. Voices drop naturally, as if not to wake the night itself. Someone hums, barely audible. Someone else stares into nothing in particular. Silence isn't awkward here. It's expected. Modern life trains you to fill gaps. Winter teaches you to leave them alone. There are moments when the darkness presses in, not frightening exactly, but heavy. You counter it with small actions, adjusting the fire, moving closer to others, touching something solid. Historians still debate how people cope psychologically with long northern winters. But from where you sit, coping looks a lot like routine. Familiar tasks anchor you. A gentle joke floats through your thoughts. You've never spent this much time indoors without once checking the weather app. And yet, you know exactly what the weather is doing. You can hear it. You can feel it in the walls. You don't need updates. That is another long night stretches ahead. You settle into the rhythm again. Darkness isn't something to fight. It's something to live alongside, patiently, until it loosens its grip. Meals become anchors in the drifting hours, not because they are elaborate, but because they arrive with reassuring regularity. You know roughly when the pot will be set over the fire, when steam will begin to rise, when everyone will lean in just a little closer. Winter food is predictable, and that predictability is a kind of comfort you hadn't realized you valued so highly. Preserved meat appears again, sliced thin to make it last. Salted lamb, smoked pork, sometimes fish, softened by long soaking. A mainstream historical fact is that salt was a critical and sometimes scarce resource in Viking communities, making preservation a careful balancing act. Too little salt invited spoilage. Too much made food nearly inedible. Historians still argue how consistently rural farms could access salt, but you treat it like something borrowed from the future, used sparingly, thoughtfully. Dairy plays a quiet but essential role. Milk doesn't last long, but it transforms ice. Butter, cheese, and sour milk products fill wooden containers, each with its own smell and texture. A quirky tidbit from experimental archaeology suggests that some Viking cheeses were intentionally sharp, not as a culinary statement, but because acidity helped preservation. You eat it without comment, spreading it thin, appreciating calories more than nuance. Grains stretch meals further. Barley and oats thicken soups and porridges, turning small amounts of meat into something that feels substantial. You stir slowly, careful not to scorch the bottom of the pot. Burning food is wasteful, and winter doesn't forgive carelessness. You've learned patience at the pace of a simmer. There's a social order to eating, though it's subtle. Elders are served first, not ceremonially, but naturally. Children eat quickly, then drift away. Conversation hums softly. No one rushes. Historians still debate how rigid Viking household hierarchies were during daily life, but winter smooths edges. Everyone depends on the same pot. You notice how chewing takes longer. Food is tougher, denser. Your jaw works steadily. It slows thought in a pleasant way. A small, sleepy joke crosses your mind. This might be the original slow food movement, minus the branding. You swallow, warmed from the inside out. After meals, nothing dramatic happens. Dishes are rinsed. Scraps are saved. Bones are cleaned carefully for tools or broth later. Nothing leaves the longhouse without a plan. This attention to leftovers isn't grim. It's practical. Winter turns thrift into second nature. As the fire burns lower and the room grows quieter, you feel satisfied, not full, in an indulgent way, but balanced. Food has done its job. It's carried you through another stretch of darkness, another small turning of time. You lean back, listening to the gentle sounds of life continuing, and let that steady rhythm guide you toward rest. Winter gives you time to notice what's broken. Not dramatically broken, just quietly failing. A loose peg in a stool, a net with one too many weak knots, a knife handle worn smooth from years of use. Summer never allows for this kind of attention. Winter insists on it. You sit near the fire, tools laid out in front of you, and begin the slow work of fixing things that don't complain but will eventually stop working if ignored. This is the season of mending. Leather straps are softened, stitched, nets are repaired knot by knot, fingers moving almost on their own. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking households were largely self-sufficient when it came to basic repairs, relying on hand skills passed down over generations. Historians still argue how specialized these skills were, but winter blurs distinctions. Everyone learns a little of everything. Woodworking fills long stretches of time. You shave small curls from a branch, shaping it into something useful. Maybe a handle, maybe a peg, maybe just practice. The sound is soft and steady, wood yielding patiently. A quirky detail from archaeological finds is that many everyday wooden objects show signs of repeated reworking, suggesting they were altered and reused rather than discarded. Winter encourages this kind of quiet creativity. Metal gets attention too, though cautiously. Iron is precious. You clean rust carefully, oil surfaces lightly, sharpen edges just enough. Sparks are rare and controlled. There's no forging frenzy, you're just maintenance. You know exactly which tools will be needed first when spring returns, and you prepare them slowly, like greeting old friends in advance. Repair work brings conversation without demanding it. Someone offers advice without insisting. Someone else watches silently, learning. There's no urgency to finish. If a task takes 3 evenings instead of 1, so be it. Winter measures progress differently. Historians still debate how productivity was perceived in agrarian winter months. But from where you sit, usefulness is enough. Occasionally, you repair something simply because it feels right. A cracked bowl that could be replaced later. A torn garment that could wait. You fix it anyway. A gentle joke drifts through your thoughts. You're not procrastinating spring work. You're pre-enjoying it. The fire crackles in agreement. As night deepens again, tools are set aside carefully. Everything has a place. Order keeps anxiety at bay. You stretch, feeling the pleasant tiredness of hands that have done something real. Even if no one outside the longhouse will ever notice, you settle back. Surrounded by things that will last a little longer because of this slow attention, winter doesn't reward speed. It rewards care, and as you rest, you sense how this quiet maintenance holds the entire season together, one small repair at a time. Firelight gathers everyone without asking. As the evening settles in, you find yourself closer together, not out of necessity alone, but because the warmth pulls you inward. This is when stories surface, not formally announced, not performed, but allowed. Someone begins speaking, and the room adjusts around that voice, leaning into it like a shared memory being slowly unfolded. These aren't always grand sagas. Those exist, of course, tales of voyages, feuds, and unlikely heroes, but winter prefers smaller stories. Anecdotes about neighbors, relatives, mistakes made long ago and still gently laughed about. A mainstream historical fact is that oral storytelling played a major role in preserving history and values in Viking society. Historians still argue how structured these sessions were, but here, it feels organic. Stories rise when silence has rested long enough. You listen more than you speak. Everyone does. Interruptions are rare, not because of rules, but because patience has become habitual. Firelight flickers across faces, exaggerating expressions just enough to make them memorable. Shadows dance behind the speaker, adding emphasis without trying. It's easy to forget the cold beyond the walls. Humor slips in quietly. Someone exaggerates a detail just enough to earn a soft chuckle. Someone else corrects them later, gently, like straightening a crooked picture. Winter humor isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. A small joke echoes longer when there's space around it. You think, briefly, that modern comedy clubs would struggle here. Too much noise, not enough listening. Children half listen, half don't, absorbing more than they realize. Elders speak when something feels worth adding. Historians still debate how much historical accuracy mattered in these oral traditions, but accuracy isn't the point tonight. Continuity is. The stories keep time moving when the sun refuses to. Sometimes, the fire pops loudly, startling everyone just a bit. Someone laughs at that too. The longhouse seems alive in these moments, participating without words. You lean back, feeling the warmth on your face, the steady presence of others around you. As voices fade and silence returns, it doesn't feel like an ending, just a pause. The stories settle into the walls, into memory, into sleep. And as you close your eyes, you understand that winter survival isn't just about food and shelter, it's about shared moments that make waiting feel shorter. Winter flattens differences. Titles matter less when everyone is cold. You notice it in small ways, the way a household head waits just as patiently for a bowl of food, or how decisions are discussed rather than declared. Authority doesn't disappear, but it softens, like frozen ground slowly accepting footprints without resistance. In warmer months, social hierarchies are clearer. Land ownership, successful harvests, strong boats, these things speak loudly. In winter, they whisper. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking society had clear social classes, from thralls to free farmers to chieftains. Historians still argue how rigid these distinctions felt in daily life, but winter levels the field in subtle ways. Everyone depends on stored food. Everyone listens to the same wind. You see cooperation replace command. Tasks are suggested, not ordered. Someone notices firewood running low and simply gets up to fetch more. Someone else adjusts a blanket around a sleeping child without being asked. These actions don't earn praise. They don't need to. Survival itself is the reward. Even disputes feel muted. Tensions still exist. They always do, but winter discourages escalation. There's nowhere to storm off to. No space for dramatic exits. Arguments are postponed, softened, or quietly forgotten. A quirky but telling detail from saga literature suggests that many conflicts conveniently resume in spring. Winter is for endurance, not drama. You reflect on how leadership looks here. It's not about control. It's about steadiness. The person others trust most is often the one who reacts least. Calm becomes a form of authority. You file this thought away, wondering how different modern life might feel if impatience weren't so loudly rewarded. As night deepens again, the longhouse settles into its familiar hush. Everyone breathes at roughly the same pace. Hierarchies dissolve into shared stillness. You rest with the quiet certainty that winter doesn't care who leads it, only cares that everyone lasts. Illness announces itself softly in winter. There's no dramatic collapse. No sudden panic, just a cough that lingers a little too long. A stiffness that doesn't ease after warming by the fire. You notice these things immediately. In a season where nothing moves quickly, even small changes stand out. You rely on observation more than action. Rest is the first remedy. Warmth is the second. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking-era medicine blended practical herbal knowledge with tradition and belief. Historians still argue how effective many of these treatments were, but you use what you have. Willow bark for pain, honey when it's available, steam from hot stones and water to ease breathing. None of it feels mystical. It feels careful. Someone gathers dried herbs from a bundle hung high on the wall. Plants collected months ago and saved with winter in mind. A quirky tidbit from archaeological finds suggests that some households stored surprisingly wide varieties of medicinal plants, indicating a deep, practical knowledge of local flora. You don't debate dosage, you trust experience. Illness slows the household, but it doesn't stop it. Tasks shift quietly. Someone else takes over feeding animals. Someone sits closer to the sick, offering company more than cures. Winter reinforces the idea that recovery is communal. No one heals alone. You notice how patience becomes treatment. There's no rushing illness out the door. It leaves when it's ready. Modern impatience would struggle here. You think, with a faint smile, about how many times you've wished a cold away with annoyance. Winter doesn't respond to that kind of negotiation. As the fire crackles on, you feel a steady reassurance. Most sickness passes. Those that don't are met with the same calm acceptance as everything else. Complaining doesn't restore health. Care does. You lean back, breathing slowly, listening to the sounds of quiet resilience filling the room. Winter holds you still, giving bodies time to mend in their own unhurried way. The weather stops being something you check and starts being something you listen to. You don't ask what it will do tomorrow. You pay attention to what it's doing now. Snow changes texture underfoot. Wind shifts pitch as it moves along the walls. Ice speaks in small cracks and groans out on the fjord, reminding you that it's still settling into itself. You learn these sounds the way others learn language. A steady wind means nothing needs adjusting. A sudden silence, though, makes you pause. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking farmers were deeply attuned to environmental cues, relying on observation rather than prediction. Historians still argue how much of this knowledge was instinct versus learned skill. But winter sharpens it either way. You dress according to sensation, not habit. Wool layers are added or removed without ceremony. There's no vanity here, just function. A quirky detail from textile studies shows that Viking clothing was often adjusted and repaired repeatedly, optimized for warmth rather than appearance. You pull a cloak tighter, feeling its familiar weight, settle your shoulders. Decisions become small and immediate. Do you go outside now, or wait an hour? Do you open the door briefly, or let the fire burn a little lower first? Weather answers these questions without words. You respond. There's no frustration in it, just conversation. As night falls again, snow begins quietly, barely audible at first. It accumulates without asking permission. You accept that too. Winter does what it does. You do what you can, and in that steady exchange, you find an unexpected calm. Belief settles into winter life the same way frost settles onto wood gradually, almost invisibly, until one day you realize it's everywhere. You don't suddenly become more spiritual because it's cold. You simply become more aware of how much is out of your hands. Whether health, daylight, the slow patience of stored food, all of it hums along beyond your control. And belief steps in to occupy that quiet space. Rituals are small and practical. A few words spoken before a meal, a gesture toward the fire, an offering left where no one makes a show of watching. A mainstream historical fact is that Norse belief systems were woven into daily life rather than confined to temples or grand ceremonies. Historians still argue how formal household rituals truly were, but winter suggests they were informal, flexible, and deeply personal. You notice how belief blends with habit. When the wind howls particularly hard, someone murmurs a name: Odin, Thor, maybe simply the gods as a group effort. Not pleading, not dramatic, more like acknowledging a neighbor passing by. A quirky tidbit from saga literature hints that many invocations were conversational rather than reverent. The gods, like winter, were forces to be respected, not negotiated with loudly. Luck becomes a quiet companion. You don't chase it, you make room for it. Tools are placed carefully. Food is shared fairly. Doors are closed gently. These small acts feel like invitations for things to go smoothly. Whether they actually influence outcomes is up for debate. Historians still argue whether such behaviors were symbolic or simply sensible, but you practice them anyway. Winter rewards consistency more than certainty. As darkness stretches on, belief offers reassurance without promises. There's no guarantee of an easy spring, no assurance that everything will work out. There is only the sense that you're part of something larger, older, and patient. You sit with that thought, letting it settle like ash from the fire, soft and warm. Patience stops feeling like a virtue and starts feeling like a skill. You practice it daily, sometimes without noticing. Waiting for water to heat, waiting for light to improve, waiting for someone to finish a story you've already heard twice. Winter gives you endless opportunities to wait, and you get surprisingly good at it. You realize that complaining would change nothing. It wouldn't shorten the night or soften the cold. So you don't do it, not as a rule, just as a habit that never formed. A mainstream historical observation is that Norse cultures placed high value on endurance and self-control, qualities praised quietly rather than loudly. Historians still argue whether this was cultural, ideal, or necessity, but winter blurs the difference. Endurance is simply practical. You watch how others wait. No fidgeting, no dramatic sighs. When something must be done, it's done. When it can't be, it's left alone. This rhythm settles into your body. You stop measuring progress in days and start measuring it in small comforts: enough warmth, enough food, enough rest. There's a subtle pride in this restraint, not the kind that needs recognition, but the kind that sits quietly in your chest. You think, faintly amused, about how modern life celebrates urgency. Here, urgency would be exhausting. Winter selects for calm. As another night unfolds, you rest easily, knowing you've learned winter's most important lesson: survive steadily, without fuss, and let time move at its own unbothered pace. The first signs of spring don't arrive with fanfare. There's no announcement, no dramatic shift. You notice them the same way you've noticed everything else this winter: quietly. Light lingers a little longer on the horizon. The air feels marginally less sharp when you step outside. Ice along the fjord edge begins to sound different, less confident in its grip. You don't rush to celebrate. Experience has taught you caution. Winter can still reclaim days without warning, but preparation begins naturally. Tools you repaired months ago are checked again, just to be sure. Seed grain is counted, then counted once more. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking farmers timed their spring activities carefully, balancing eagerness with realism. Historians still argue how early planting truly began in northern regions, but everyone agrees patience mattered right up until the end. Animals sense the change before you fully trust it. They shift more, they grow restless. A cow nudges at a gate, sheep bleat with new insistence. You respond calmly, adjusting routines without abandoning them. Winter hasn't ended yet, but it's loosening its hold. That's enough for now. Conversation turns outward again, not with excitement, but with planning. Boats are mentioned. Fields are imagined. The world slowly expands beyond the longhouse walls. You feel it too, like a careful stretching after a long rest. Nothing aches quite as much anymore. When the snow finally retreats in earnest, it does so unevenly, revealing patches of earth like secrets being returned. You stand and watch without ceremony. You made it, not heroically, not loudly, simply by staying steady, sharing space, conserving energy, and trusting time to move forward on its own terms. And now, as the season turns and your breathing slows, the long winter begins to fade, not from memory, but from urgency. The fire burns low, steady, and kind. The sounds around you soften, wind becomes distant, voices fall quiet. Your body remembers the rhythm it learned here. Slow, patient, unbundled. You let your thoughts drift the same way snow once did, settling gently wherever they land. There's nothing left to prepare, nothing left to endure tonight. Just rest, warmth, and the quiet knowledge that waiting, done well, can carry you safely through even the longest seasons.